Welcome to Foundation Friday. The dedication and covenant of silent unity was signed on December 7th, 1892 by Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, founders of the Unity movement. It is unlikely when they signed this covenant that they had any idea how far-reaching unity would be as it evolved into the church we know and love today. We invite you to join us as we explore and share some of the original ideas, teachings, and writings of the men and women who created the foundation of the Unity Church.
Hi there. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Foundation Friday series. Today, we're going to take a look at the history of race relations at Unity World Headquarters. You know, we tend to think of Unity as it is today, all inclusive, welcoming of all people. But Unity grew up in America, and there is a history of evolution in our race relations. This article was published at unity.org, and the name of the article I'm going to share with you is A Timeline of Race Relations at Unity World Headquarters. So 1800s. In 1820, U.S. Congress passes the Missouri Compromise, admitting Missouri to the Union as a slave state. To maintain a balance of slave and non-slave states, Maine is admitted as a free state. So we all know that Unity Worldwide Headquarters is in Missouri. So in 1820, when they joined the Union, they joined as a slave state. Well, 1961 through 65, during the Civil War, Missouri sends men and supplies to both sides and is represented by a star on each flag. The state government is led by Unionists, but a Confederate state government remains a presence. So the government of Missouri at the time itself was divided. In 1863, the Federal Emancipation Proclamation frees slaves in the territory held by Confederate forces. As a border state, Missouri is exempt. 2 years later, a state convention votes 60-4 to approve a law abolishing slavery, and the Missouri governor signs it the very same day. In 1865, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is ratified, abolishing slavery. In 1868, the 14th Amendment grants Black Americans citizenship and guarantees them equal protection under the law. In 1889, Unity is founded by Charles and Myrtle Fillmore in Kansas City, Missouri. It has a variety of organizational names until it is incorporated in 1914 as Unity School of Christianity. Said Charles Fillmore, the object of this school is the redemption of the human race. In 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court rules Plessy versus Ferguson that segregated facilities are constitutional if they are equal, enshrining the doctrine of separate but equal, and paving the way for Jim Crow laws that segregate public accommodations by race, hotels, trains, and buses, restrooms, drinking fountains, beaches, and pools, and even more. The 1900s. In 1901, a Black child is included in a drawing used as the standard cover on the Unity We Wisdom magazine for children. Also in 1901, a white mob takes 3 Black men from the jail in Pierce County in southwest Missouri, lynches them, burns Black homes, and drives Black families into the woods. The Equal Justice Initiative now estimates 60 Black people were lynched in Missouri between 1877 and 1950, one of the highest rates outside of the Deep South. In 1916, Lowell Fillmore, the oldest son of Charles and Myrtle, becomes general manager of Unity and later president after his father died in 1948. In 1919, several study groups for colored people are listed in Weekly Unity magazine. In 1920, historical pictures show Black students with Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. A Unity Center for Black people opens in New York City. Also in 1920, Charles Fillmore begins buying land 15 miles southeast of Kansas City and calls it Unity Farm. The downtown operations continue until 1949, when all work is consolidated at the farm. Also, in the 1920s, Kansas City is being developed with green boulevards, stunning fountains, and stately homes in deliberately segregated neighborhoods. Developer J.C. Nicholas advertises them as highly restricted neighborhoods where discriminating people buy. In 2020, Nicholas' name is removed from the Parkway and Memorial Fountain near Kansas City's famed Country Club Plaza, which he planned and opened in 1923. In 1927, in his speech at the Unity Summer Conference, Charles Fillmore says, "We see no separation in color, in race, in sect, in creed, in anything. We are all one in spirit." But he also makes occasional jokes about Black people in his Sunday lessons. In 1928, the annual conference at Unity Farms includes a special program featuring Black speakers. 1930, Black people are leading several Unity centers and study groups in the United States. In 1931, the Unity Training School, housed at Unity Farm, is established as a 4-year correspondence school with students encouraged to visit campus for 1 month each summer. In 1933, Rickett Fillmore, the second son of Charles and Myrtle, opens a ministerial training program at Unity Farm. In 1934, the Federal Housing Administration begins redlining areas where Black citizens cannot get mortgage insurance. It also subsidizes white homeowners' subdivisions with a policy that incompatible racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities. Also in 1934, the Unity Ministers Association agrees to admit Black ministers if they desire to join. In 1934, Unity states in its training school bulletin, owing to limited living accommodations at Unity Farm, it will be necessary for all colored students who register for classwork to live in Kansas City. It adds, meals will be served a la carte separately to Negro students in the terrace tea room. When the housing policy comes under attack from The Call, a local Black-owned newspaper, its story quotes Lowell Fillmore saying, "We are feeling our way along. This is Missouri, and the Missouri people are not educated to the point, as yet, where they will accept Negroes on a basis of equality." In 1937, the annual conference includes licensed Unity teachers who are Black. The conference board agrees that Black teachers listed in Unity publications will no longer be labeled colored teacher. In 1938, white people attending the annual conference suggest that Unity find accommodations for Black students at Unity Farm because unreliable bus service from Kansas City often causes them to miss meetings. Unity does not act. In 1946, May Rowland, head of the Silent Unity Prayer Ministry, submits a customer's testimonial for Unity magazine, but asks the editors whether it's wise to print it since the woman mentioned she was a Negro. The editors say it's fine to print reasoning. It might create a good feeling among the Negroes as regards to our efforts to help them. In 1948, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that racially restricted housing covenants are not legally enforceable. In 1949, President Harry Truman desegregates the U.S. Armed Forces. Truman, who represented Missouri in the U.S. Senate for a decade, grew up in Independence, 13 miles from Unity Farm. In 1952, the first Black ministers ordained by Unity are 2 women. In 1953, Unity Farm is incorporated as its own township called Unity Village. 1953 through 1955, a Unity Training School brochure says, "We hope in time to have living accommodations on Unity Farm for our Negro students." In 1953, a Black ministerial student named Johnny Coleman from Chicago is told she will not be allowed to live on Unity grounds. She begins to commute 15 miles each way from Kansas City. Hopefully you know who Reverend Johnny Coleman was. She was instrumental in fixing Unity's racial problems. Okay, back to the story. In 1953, at Christmas, Unity entertains employees with a minstrel show. Unity News lists 13 white men, including Lowell Fillmore, whose faces were blackened for the event. Unity has a handful of Black employees at this time. In 1954, in a unanimous vote, the U.S. Supreme Court overturns separate but equal doctrine, ruling in Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka that segregated schools are inherently unequal and unconstitutional. In 1955, student Johnny Coleman demands to live on Unity grounds, backed by a petition from white classmates. Unity offers her a cottage. Later that year, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white man on a bus, sparking the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott and setting in motion the civil rights movement. In 1956, Unity Training School no longer requires Black students to live in Kansas City. In 1963, during a summer youth conference, Black children attending the conference are allowed to swim in the Unity Pool for the first time. That was 1963. Can you imagine? 1964, Congress passes a Civil Rights Act prohibiting employment discrimination based on race, religion, or national origin. In 1965, Congress passes the Voting Rights Act to protect minorities voting in elections. In 1966, now Reverend, she's actually Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman, returns to Unity Village and finds that although Black students are not allowed to live on grounds, housing, oh, I'm sorry, let's start that again. In 1966, Reverend Johnny Coleman returns to Unity Village and finds that although Black students are now allowed to live on grounds, housing is segregated and unequal. Lowell Fillmore asked for more time to deal with it. 1966, a group of ministers establishes the Association of Unity Churches, a nonprofit professional organization separate from the Unity School of Christianity to support ministers and ministries. It is called today Unity Worldwide Ministries. In 1968, Congress passes the Fair Housing Act, forbidding discrimination in sales or rentals of housing. In 1971, Charles R. Fillmore, the grandson of Charles and Myrtle, becomes president and chairman of the board for Unity School. In 1974, Reverend Johnny Coleman leaves Unity and founds a branch of New Thought called the Universal Foundation for Better Living. Half the Black ministers in Unity go with her. In 1979, Reverend Ruth Mosley founds a seminary in Detroit, the Unity Urban Ministerial School, to train ministers who will work in inner cities and to attract Black people into Unity ministry. She serves as executive director until 2013. In 1983, Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday becomes a U.S. holiday to be observed on the third Monday each January. In 1983, also, Rosemary Fillmore Ray, the granddaughter of Charles and Myrtle, writes about Reverend Johnny Coleman. Today, it is difficult to believe that Unity would participate in such blatant discrimination. In 1987, Connie Fillmore Basley, the great-granddaughter of Charles and Myrtle, is the fourth generation in the family to become president of Unity School. In 1993, Black students create a program to share the contributions of African Americans in the Unity movement. In 1998, Reverend Johnny Coleman is invited to Unity Village and presented a proclamation by students. Late 1990s, Unity School forms a diversity college that brings in consultants to facilitate workshops with the staff and board. So that's a little bit about the history of Unity Worldwide Ministries up to the 1900s. It's hard to believe that it's taken us so long to get to the point where we are with acceptance, equality, tolerance, and love. It's our hope that we can stand together and make sure we don't lose ground, but only move forward in our oneness. Before we go, please remember, you matter. You are sacred, and you are so, so very loved. Namaste.
Thank you for joining us, and let's stay connected and grow in spirit. We are on Facebook. Search for Unity Church of El Cajon and follow us and like our posts. You can reach us on YouTube at Unity Church of El Cajon. Please subscribe to our channel, watch our videos, and leave comments which can help us improve. We are on the web at unityofelcajon.org. Email or call our church office to receive our weekly newsletters, which lists all of our activities and opportunities to learn and grow together.